When I was probably 13, my family and I were on our way home from a Wednesday night church service. My mom was in the driver's seat and I was behind her in the back. My 5-year-old brother was in the middle and my 10-year-old sister on his other side. We were just down the road from the church, but it was a country road and late, so there was no light and no one else on the road. We were just coming up to our turn when all of a sudden a car comes swerving from our turning spot. This little car was taking the turn so fast that they came into our lane and almost hit us. We swerved as they tried to get in their own lane before we collided. Unfortunately for them, they overcorrected, and their car flipped and landed on the driver's side door in the ditch. My mom, of course, hits the brakes and immediately jumps out of the car to go help whoever was in there. She got about 3 steps away from our car and stopped dead in her tracks. My sister and I are sitting there with our mouths hanging wide open, having no clue what to do. All I could think is, this isn't actually happening to us. This kind of stuff only happens in movies. But why isn't my mom going to help the person? It was summer, so we had all our windows halfway down. I heard a person start yelling help from inside and my mom starts moving again to help him. But for some reason, she stops again in the center of the road. Another car flies up behind us and the guy doesn't hesitate to jump out and run up to the crash to help. The man gets to the car and starts prying the passenger door open so the guy inside can get out. I can see my mom wants to run and help, but it's like she can't move from that spot. The good Samaritan that pulled up behind us is able to get the door popped open. The guy from inside crawls out the door and gets into a frog-like crouching position on top of the car. At this point, my mom starts taking shuffle steps back to the car. When I look back at the guy, he has this crazy look on his face. He looks directly at our car and my mom and launches himself off the top of the car and hits the guy who was helping him. He starts running for our car at the same time my mom turns and runs for our car. He must have knew he couldn't get there before my mom did, because he changed directions and moves to the car behind us. My mom jumps in and locks our doors just as the guy jumps in the empty driver's seat of the car behind us. He slams on the gas before he has even closed the door and almost hits us, taking off a second time. Next thing we know, the guy who was just carjacked runs up to my mom's window and starts screaming and knocking on the window. My mom is of course shaken and doesn't want to roll down the window, so she settles for cracking it so we can understand what he's saying. He is yelling, asking us to call 911 because his phone was in the car along with his girlfriend. So of course, my mom starts searching for her phone to call. But because she is so frantic from what just happened, she can't seem to find it. So I take a break from keeping my little brother and sister calm and dial 911 on my phone and hand it to her. While she is explaining what happened to the 911 operator, we hear a woman scream down the road. The man that was at our window takes off running, and a few minutes later comes back with a severely scraped up woman in his arms that turned out to be his girlfriend. My mom unlocks the doors at this point and he sets her in the passenger seat while we wait for the cops. The girlfriend told us that he noticed her while he was speeding off and tried to hit her, but she scratched and punched at him, all while trying to plead with him to stop the car. He kept coming at her though and finally rolled down the window and pushed her out, going about 60. The cops finally show up and talk to all of us to get our stories. While talking to one officer, he told my mom that the man had shot and killed a man behind some apartment complex. That's why he was driving so fast and trying to get away. When we finally got home, we were all told to go to bed, but of course I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. So I went downstairs to talk to my mom. I worked up the courage to ask her why she stopped running to the car when the other guy didn't. She told me she had such a strong feeling that she should stay in the car with us that it was almost like she could hear it. When she heard him start yelling for help, she ran to help again, but just like last time, she got the overwhelming feeling not to go to the car. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if my mom hadn't listened to that feeling. The man could have easily overpowered her and gotten to the car if she had been any further away. I should also mention the man was caught that night trying to steal a new car. He had already ditched the car he stole from behind us. So the thing that really helped him get convicted was that when the woman was fighting him off, she grabbed the wrap off his head before falling out. She didn't know she did till the police got there and found it by where she was pushed. He did go to jail, but I was never informed of how long or anything else, and honestly, I never cared to ask. Trigger warning, this story contains a description of domestic violence. Years ago, I pushed really hard to make sure my daughter got a cell phone at a pretty early age, around 12. My former spouse did not really understand why this was such a big deal to me. I could not really explain it at the time, but I had a reason why I needed her to have a phone. And part of it was from my own experience as a young 14-year-old babysitter. I loved babysitting for Jack and Diane. Not only were they the coolest couple ever, but their kids were sweet and so fun. They had a little toddler boy, Matt, and John, the baby. Jack was a biker and he often picked me up on his Harley, which was the most amazing thing ever. And his wife loaned me a lot of her leather clothes to wear to rock concerts. They went out partying a lot and paid well. It was like a dream job. They were out clubbing that night. I had put Matt to bed and rocked John off to sleep. It was a cold night, so they had taken the Mercedes instead of the bike. It was so late. Even with checking on the sleeping kids regularly, I was getting sleepy. It was never an issue. They did not mind at all if I dozed off to sleep, which I did this night. I woke up with a start, heart pounding. I have no idea what woke me up. Neither kid woke up, and there was no noise, but for whatever reason, I was wide awake and terrified. I had just gotten my panic under control when I heard a car door slam shut. I looked out the window and saw they were home, so I went to open the front door. Diane came in and one side of her face was horribly swollen and she was bleeding. Stupidly, I asked, "Did you get into a fight?" She raced past me to the phone at the dining room table and started dialing. It was an old tabletop style of phone. Jack came in next, flying past me and screaming. He grabbed the heavy phone receiver from her hand and bashed the side of her head. He ripped the phone from the wall. She screamed back, holding her very battered face. He smashed her head into the wall, and then she staggered into the bedroom, out of sight. I heard more screaming and ugly sounds of blows landing when she came tumbling out of the bedroom, thrown through the hallway into the crib, waking John. She crawled out of the room as he cried, and Jack dragged her into the hallway and screamed at the baby to shut up. I was terrified and did not know what to do, so I went and grabbed the baby, cuddling him and turning him away from the image of his dad, straddling his mom and choking her. The silence as he settled was almost scarier than the screaming. Was she dead? I got John settled again and came back out into the living room. I did not know what to do. Diane lay on the floor, broken, bleeding, barely recognizable, but somehow still breathing. Jack told me to sit down as he dialed a number on his cell phone. I slowly perched on the edge of the couch. Diane crawled to me then, gurgling words. She begged me to protect her babies. I just kept thinking that I was just a kid too. Soon, a bunch of Jack's buddies were there. A few of them said they would take Diane to the hospital. Jack asked if I would stay with the kids. Diane started screaming if I stayed he would kill me. I said I just wanted to go home. One of the guys said he would call his wife to stay with the kids. They left with Diane. Jack looked at me and told me to get in the car, he would take me home. I had no way to call for help or a different ride. The whole way home, I just tried to stay calm. The turn to my street was at the bottom of a dip. We approached the turn as Jack kept telling me how he did not want to go back to prison, how he would do anything to not go back to prison. I kept nodding and agreeing as he took his foot off the brake and drove past the turn. I looked at him horrified. I just want to talk. I need to calm down before I go home to my kids, okay? We ended up at an all-night donut shop. He had a coffee and donut, got me something, and spent more than the next hour telling me how he was not a bad guy. Prison had changed him. I was less than 5 kilometers from my home, but no way to call for help and no one knew where I was. I just tried to be supportive and agreed with everything he said. He paid me $50, which was a lot for back then. Finally, we got back into the car and he drove me home. It was one of the longest nights ever. I woke up to a police cruiser outside my house. Diane refused to press charges. About a week later, I got a letter from her apologizing for everything, taking all of the blame. Sometimes I wonder if she left before he killed her. I wonder if those sweet kids grew up to be good people. So that is one reason why I made sure my daughter had a way to call for help. Hello there, fellow Redditors. For context, I had a teacher who was in his late 50s to 60s, and he was highly respected in the small Central California community I lived in. He was the AP Economics teacher at my high school. This took place about 15 years ago when I was a senior. I remember several weird experiences with this teacher. I will call him Mr. Smith. One day in class, and I don't know how it was brought up, but Mr. Smith decided he was going to give our class a mental exercise. I didn't think anything of it, but then again, I was a pretty innocent and naive teenager at the time. The class went along with it and didn't see an issue with this. I remember him saying he was also a psychology professor at the local university, so anyways, he told the class to close our eyes and meditate for a few minutes and begin thinking about immersing ourselves in a body of water. He said it's okay if we envision a river, a creek, an ocean, or whatever, but he stressed it had to be water we were imagining ourselves in. So I began letting the thoughts come, and I imagined myself next to a creek bed, throwing rocks into the water. You can stop now, open your eyes. The exercise was done. He told us to remember our vision, and he said he was going to ask each of us what we imagined. Mind you, this class was split between girls and boys, so each of us goes around one by one and tells the class out loud what we thought about. I remember a boy in my class said he imagined himself in a rushing waterfall. There were girls that mentioned they were swimming in a lake, fishing at the pond, and so on. My turn came and I told Mr. Smith and our class I imagined myself next to a small creek. I specifically remember he has this weird grin the entire time each of us were telling him what was in our minds during this exercise. Mr. Smith finally told us why he had the class do this exercise. He said the exercise was to measure our sexuality and our sexual awakening. He said the people who envisioned themselves in large bodies of water had a high sex drive, while the students who were in calmer and smaller environments of water hadn't really tapped into their sexuality. The boy who had the vision of being in a waterfall made a joke and the whole class laughed. I just remember thinking it was weird. I looked around at the class and it didn't seem like anyone was uncomfortable. If they were, they didn't voice it or express it. Mr. Creepy also did this thing where he would pick on a student and ask them a very specific question from our economics textbook. If the student didn't give him an answer he liked, we would stare them down for literally what felt like a minute without saying anything. You could feel the tension in the class, and usually the student with the wrong answer would sink down into their seat with humiliation. Anyways, a few months later I approached Mr. Smith after class and asked him what I could do for extra credit. I only took away a few things from this conversation. I remember him telling me, "You are incredibly smart, I don't think you need extra credit." Okay, but still I wanted extra credit. So he then says, "I love your shirt, where did you get it?" I was wearing a shirt with a unicorn and a yellow yield sign. So I told him I bought it at a thrift store called Red Light located in Seattle where I am from. He has his stupid grin again and I ask, "What is it?" Mr. Smith said, "Red Light is a porn site. Did you know anything about that?" I immediately left. I later looked up the website and sure enough there was the porn site he was referring to. Later on in the semester, Mr. Smith stopped coming to class and we had a substitute for the remainder of the year. I remember other students whispering in class where Mr. Smith had gone, and some students were saying he got in trouble and was being investigated. Austin, Texas. This happened last night about 1:15 midnight. I was in my bed when I heard frantic knocking. I walked out of my bedroom while the knocking continued again and heard a woman saying, "Please help me," along with crying, but it was faint. I looked out the peephole to see no one there and no other doors were being knocked on. Just mine, which is odd by itself, but I am also on the 3rd floor. Why would someone walk all the way up to just my apartment if in distress? I think it was a recording because if someone really needed help, they would be banging on everyone's door. I called the police immediately and the dispatcher told me not to open the door and asked if I had a weapon. I have heard of this tactic before, while slightly different with it being a recording of a baby crying. Just insane when thinking about the statistics of stranger abductions and how they usually result in murder. Also, it's just so sick to try and prey on people's empathy. Police drove by, I saw them using their spotlight to look through the complex, but as of now I have no idea if anyone was found, or by chance someone really was hurt if they found her. I've barely slept with all the possibilities of how this person found me, where they saw me, when they followed me, or if they live in this complex. I am 4 foot 10 inches. I live alone and don't know many people in my area. No family or close either. Have they been watching me and know all this? I mean, it's just making me go crazy. Stay vigilant, don't fall for these tactics, and know that not everything you read on the internet is false. I heard about this a year ago and wonder if I hadn't already been aware of this. Would I have opened the door? Where would I be right now? Would I be alive? This world is screwed up. Update at 2:57 p.m. I have talked with the management to let them know what is going on. As of right now, no one else has reported to them of anything similar happening. I am going to contact the police again for an update. I was redirected to another PD, but they weren't the ones who responded to the call. I know it takes some time for reports to be filed, so I am trying to be patient. I just want to know if this has happened to anyone else. I have ordered a Ring camera and will be picking it up shortly. At least this way I could get video of them if they come back, and it will help me sleep better. As far as it being a prank, absolutely it could be. but I would be more inclined to believe it if it happened to other women in the apartment. Maybe it has, but they haven't said anything. On one side of the coin, it's a very cruel prank that I shouldn't worry about. The other is that someone has been watching me and had something sinister in mind. Horrifying to think someone would pull an elaborate prank like this of real-world things that happen that we never think could happen to us. When it comes to guns and self-defense classes, I will be getting both of these, but they both take time and a lot of money. I don't want to just get a cheap gun with no training. That won't help much. It will be something I will invest my time and money into, but for the short-term security, I can really only get a Ring camera and stay updated with the PD. Thank you everyone with your helpful tips, like the neighborhood apps and gun safety. I appreciate it so much during this very scary time. Update 2, 8:30 p.m. I have my Ring camera installed and working. I feel much safer knowing if they come back, I can at least have a recording of them. I know I need to talk to my neighbors, but right now I'm exhausted from no sleep and still spooked, so I will do that tomorrow. Also, hopefully the police report will be filed tomorrow.